Are you a professional who wants to become a more effective leader? Then get ready for daily tips from the coach with the experience and inspiration to help you succeed in any leadership situation. You're listening to the Meeting Leadership Podcast with Gordon Shepherd.
Welcome to another episode of the Meeting Leadership Podcast. My name is Gordon Shepherd, and I just want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your valuable day to spend time here on the podcast picking up another leadership skill, another strategy that you can take back to make your next meeting way more productive and way more profitable. Today's episode, it is a blockbuster because today we're going to talk about how to measure the annual cost of meetings. Can you imagine if you actually understood that number? You're a president, you're a CEO, you're a business owner, whoever you are at the head of the organization, then they could pinpoint which meetings were the most valuable, as in which ones were producing the best sort of team interaction, the best products, the best innovations, the best services, and they could also figure out which meetings were wasting the most amount of time, which meetings were killing their staff retention ability, that kind of thing. This is really critical information for the head of every organization. And I want to remind you that we kicked off this concept back in episode 20 of the Meeting Leadership Podcast. It was called How to Measure the Real Cost of a Meeting. And there, we introduced the idea of the meeting cost calculator formula, which was really focusing on how to measure the hourly cost of a meeting. And to help you work through this, I'm going to refer to 3 different examples. And here's the first one. Let's say you've got 10 people on your staff. You have a weekly staff meeting for 1 hour every week, and that staff meeting costs you $1,000 an hour. Well, multiply that times 50, suddenly you realize that weekly staff meeting is costing you $50,000 per year. Well, when you look at your MROI, your meeting return on investment, you can ask yourself, what did we get for $50,000 in that weekly staff meeting? Did we get some innovations? Did we move the needle forward? Was it valuable for team building? Or were we talking about cat videos and what we did on the weekend and actually just simply burning up 500 hours of staff time? And believe me when I say that when you start to think about it like this, suddenly that weekly staff meeting will become very precious and a lot more productive. Which leads me into example number 2. Now, I've written a book, it's called The Meeting Leadership Solution, and I can tell you there was a project manager one time, he bought the book and he got so emboldened when he actually read the book, and he went to his boss and he said, why do we have to meet for an hour every week to do an updates meeting one-on-one? And his boss replied and said, well, that's how we've always done it around here. And he said, well, could we meet every second week instead? And reluctantly, his boss said, all right, we'll try it. And guess what happened? The boss liked it so much that they actually ended up doing this with all of their direct reports. So instead of meeting once a week with everybody, they started meeting every other week instead. And that boss, they got a full day back into their month. As a senior leader, what would you do if you got a full day back into your month? Maybe you can get onto those special projects you were supposed to do and other things besides wasting time in bad meetings. Which leads me into example number 3. And I like to talk about Alberta Healthcare because I actually live in Alberta, Canada. Now, this is a large organization. Budget is north of $22 billion a year. They've got over 100,000 employees and probably another 10,000 sort of medical people they deal with as well. You can imagine that in an organization of this size, there are a lot of meetings. And let me take a moment to do some overly simple calculations to try and come up with sort of a round figure for the annual cost of meetings per year. Here's an idea. Imagine that each person out of the 100,000 has to go to 1 meeting per week. Now, if each meeting has about 5 people in it, then there are about 20,000 meetings per week happening in this organization. And when we multiply that times 50, it is reasonable to say that there are at least 1 million meetings per year happening in this organization. Well, if each of those meetings is worth $500, which is pretty reasonable to say in a healthcare setting, is it possible that there's $500 million being spent on meetings every year at Alberta Healthcare? And when you start to look at it this way, you have to ask yourself, were all of those meetings productive? What would happen if you cut the worst 5% of all of those meetings? 5% times $500 million? Well, then you would have $25 million worth of people's time and resources to reallocate to other activities. Now, if you're the CEO of a large organization like this, how powerful would it be if you did this exercise? And what would the impact on overall productivity be if you stitched in this concept of meeting return on investment for every person within your organization? So they could put their hand up and say, wait a second, this meeting is not giving us anything back. We're wasting our time. Or they could say, this meeting is fantastic. We're developing new ideas. We're pushing things forward. We're going deeper as a team. We actually want to do more of it. And that is why I believe you should make the time to learn how to measure the annual cost of meetings. And just as a reminder, if you'd like to learn how to measure the hourly cost of a meeting, then listen to episode 20 of the Meeting Leadership Podcast. It's called How to Measure the Real Cost of a Meeting. And you can get that by going to meetingleadershipinc.com/20. And if you want to make your meetings even more valuable from a big picture perspective, then check out episode 2 on the podcast. It's called How to Connect Your Meetings to Your Strategy. And you can get that by going to meetingleadershipinc.com/2. And I also want to let you know that this episode of the Meeting Leadership Podcast is brought to you by the Meeting Leadership Academy. Big picture, small picture, whether you are a leader looking for new skills or you just want to learn how to run an outstanding meeting, visit meetingleadershipinc.com/academy to learn more. And as always, thanks for listening. And we'll see you tomorrow on the Meeting Leadership Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Meeting Leadership Podcast. Be sure to subscribe for more strategies to help you become an outstanding leader. And don't forget to rate and review so we can bring you fresh content every day. We'll see you tomorrow, right here on the Meeting Leadership Podcast.
I'm on top of the world, now I'm living. The good just gets better, keeps on giving. Not even close to the end, it's just beginning. Life is getting lighter while